Hello, Oceanside Collegiate Academy. Mr. Muma again, welcoming you back to another exciting episode of U.S. History. Today we're going to be talking about the War of 1812. Following up on the early republic and the establishment of the Constitution, this is America's first great test, the first major war the United States gets in, where in many ways its very existence as a nation is challenged. The War of 1812 is often given short shrift in U.S. history classes, sort of spent a lot of time talking about the Constitution, and the War of 1812 happened, and then we start moving into the Civil War and all that. But the War of 1812, I think, is extremely important. It's one of the most important wars the United States ever fought. It changes the character of the United States. It changes our relations with the Indians on the frontier forever. It changes the way foreign powers interact with us, with the Indians. And it really sets the progress of the United States on its way. After this war, there's no stopping us. We're rolling across the continent, and that's going to be the pattern moving on up into the Civil War. So, to begin with, I didn't talk about this much last time, which I kind of debated where to actually throw it in there about the development of political parties. But since it has so much to do with what happens during the War of 1812, I thought I'd go ahead and talk about it now. When the Constitution is established, it's established with the idea that there aren't going to be political factions and parties. The Founding Fathers hated that idea. They hated the idea that people would just belong to this political group or that political group. As far as they were concerned, politics is something that should be conducted by gentlemen, among gentlemen, propertied, educated men who know how to run a society. So first of all, you don't want to get just all these people involved in it, and second of all, you don't want everybody forming these kind of cliques and cabals and everything like that. Well, that doesn't last long at all. While the first president, Washington, kind of claims to stand above party and everything like that, it rapidly becomes apparent that Washington is identifying more and more with a set of people who come to be identified as Federalists. The Federalists are initially the group who are just gung-ho for ratifying the Constitution. Not Jefferson, scratch that. Hamilton, Madison, John Jay, John Marshall, Washington himself, Ben Franklin a little bit. He's kind of out of the picture at this point, obviously, but somewhat. Those are the Federalists, John Adams. Federalists want a strong central government. They want an economy focused on business. They want a national bank. Hamilton establishes the first bank in the United States. They want a strong central government. It's popular in cities. It's popular among merchants. It's popular among people who want the United States to grow as a world power. Opposing them are a faction that coalesces initially around the people who are most opposed to the establishment of the Constitution. The set that demands a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, remember, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which ended up getting passed a few years after the Constitution. This group coalesces around Thomas Jefferson. These are the Democratic Republicans. Jefferson's vision for the future of America is very, very different than Hamilton's. Jefferson wants a nation of small farmers. He thinks small farmers are just the backbone of a republic. They're naturally virtuous, ready to come to the nation's call when needed. He doesn't like big cities. He doesn't like this burgeoning industrial revolution, this market economy we're going to talk about. Jefferson has an absolute loathing of banks and anything associated with banking. Democratic Republicans appeal to people in rural areas. They definitely appeal to people on the frontier. One of the reasons, what we're going to see today is what happens to the Federalist Party is that its appeal is just so limited that it ends up kind of dying out. So the Federalists end up in control of power, Washington essentially, and then John Adams. Then you get the Democratic Republicans, Thomas Jefferson, and eventually after Thomas Jefferson, you get James Madison, who, while being one of the architects of the Constitution, by this point in his career has largely come to sympathize with Jefferson's positions more so than Hamilton's. So, by 1812, you've got James Madison as President of the United States, as all these things are developing. Now, we talked about the backdrop, what's going on in Europe while the American Revolution is sorting itself out while the Constitution is being founded. The big thing, of course, is the French Revolution. Britain Britain is opposed to France. France is opposed to Britain. So how does the United States deal with this? Well, the United States initially tries to be neutral between both. However, that becomes increasingly impossible. Britain feels that shipping anything to France helps Napoleon. Napoleon feels that shipping anything to Britain helps Britain. So each side wants the United States to stop trading with the other, and they're willing to use military means to do that. Jefferson, during his presidency toward the end, responds with something called the Embargo Acts, which basically means he says the United States is not trading with either France or Britain. Shut down. Forget both of them. Which, of course, alienates merchants, who are mostly Federalists. They don't like Thomas Jefferson, who's a Democratic Republican. Jefferson very openly supports the French Revolution. He's a big fan of it, even when blood's flowing in the street, when it's apparent to pretty much everybody else that things have kind of gone downhill for it. At the very least, Jefferson is just foursquare behind it. So this really alienates the Federalists as well. They think that Jefferson is just needlessly prodding Britain, trying to antagonize them. The British, for their part, aren't doing anything to ease tensions. For one thing, the British are basically kidnapping Americans. One thing about serving in the Royal Navy is that it's terrible. The Royal Navy is not a fun place to serve. It is the conditions are terrible. You're issued alcohol on a daily basis because if you're not slightly buzzed, you really can't even do the work. It's so hard. When you go to war with another ship, you're out there sailing, you see an enemy ship, you close in on them, you're blazing away at each other with cannons at very close range. The noise is horrendous. Wooden splinters off these big oak planks that basically make up the ship come flying, slice you up, blown apart by grape shot, musket shot, blunderbuss. It's horrible. So most people don't want to serve on British ships, especially when American merchant ships pay so much more for experienced sailors. So if you're a British sailor and you end up in America somehow, like your British ship's trading over there, Royal Navy ship or whatever, you're likely to jump ship. You just flee and run away and join an American ship and make actual money as a sailor as opposed to just this horrendous military service. So the British realize that a lot of their people are going to America, and to mitigate that, essentially, the British start stopping American ships on the high seas, boarding American ships, grabbing anybody they say is a British subject, and impressing them, which is to say basically drafting them into the Royal Navy. Now, there's no way to tell if these people actually are British nationals or if they're American citizens, and the British aren't very picky about who they take. This is not how you treat a country you respect. Britain is not treating the United States like a real country. It's treating it like it's still sort of a subordinate colony. They do what they want and they dare us to stop them. At one point, the Chesapeake affair, they actually fire on an American warship and kill a number of sailors right off the coast of America. Not only that, not only are Americans being impressed on the high seas, there's also the fact that the British are still very active among the Indians on the frontier. The Indians are very well aware that an expanding America means the end of their way of life and their control over their territories, and they're very eager to ally with the British as much as they can to prevent this. That's not to say that every Indian tribe on the frontier favors war with the United States. Opinions vary. Some people say, fighting these people is pointless, they're way too powerful, let's try to accommodate ourselves with them. Some people say, well, look at all the stuff they have. They have all these guns and money and more food and more people than us. Maybe they got something going we need to know about. Some people, though, are hardliners. People like this guy here, Tecumseh. Tecumseh has fought with the British in the Revolutionary War against the Americans. His people, the Shawnee, have come out much the worse for that. They're forced off their traditional lands. Tecumseh is very angry about this and makes a deal with the British, and basically with British money and British supplies, in 1811, he launches attacks on the frontier. And not only is Tecumseh launching attacks, Tecumseh is an extraordinary man. Tecumseh is going all along the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, talking to tribe after tribe after tribe, recruiting other people to join with him. America's seen this before with Pontiac's rebellion a few generations earlier. An Indian leader managed to get a coalition of tribes, not one can be beaten, but a wide coalition of tribes all along the frontier attacking at the same time. This is the big fear on the American frontier. So already in 1811, before the official war with Britain starts, Tecumseh is already fighting. Now, a number of people see this deteriorating situation, and they say, you know what? Good. The United States needs a war. We need to show Britain, first of all, who's in charge, and we need to expand. War is not a bad thing at this point in American history. We're tough. We beat the British last time, didn't we? We'll beat them again, and we'll solve these problems that we've been having with the British once and for all. And on top of that, we'll get Canada. The United States had invaded Canada during the Revolutionary War. It had not worked. America got defeated and pushed back. But that dream of conquering Canada is still there. The Warhawks dream, the Warhawks, the people advocating this war in America, the Warhawks dream of a United States that covers the entire North American continent, embracing Canada, embracing Louisiana, which we already have, embracing New Spain, Mexico, everything. All of it now under the United States government. It's a just huge, ambitious dream, or nightmare, I guess, depending on who you ask. And it's part of this incipient nationalism in America. Nationalism is an important phenomenon we're going to talk about as we move through. But this idea, the idea of manifest destiny, which we're going to talk about later on, this idea that America is destined to expand. Now, there's a lot of these and Warhawk, by the way, is not an official term. These guys don't call themselves Warhawks, just something historians later have applied to them. These are two prominent Warhawks. This right here is Henry Clay of Kentucky. Henry Clay is extremely important. We are going to say his name over and over and over again right up to the Civil War. He figures in pretty much every lecture we're going to do from now on. Well, up to obviously the Civil War. Henry Clay is from Kentucky. Gets elected to Congress. His very first term in Congress, he is elected Speaker of the House. That's usually a position that you get after many, many years of service. It's very prestigious. He's so talented. Henry Clay, you're it. You're Secretary. You're Speaker of the House. Henry Clay is the most gifted legislator in the 19th century, by far in America. He is a man who is able to wheel and deal and get done what he wants done like no one else. Time and time again, we're going to see Henry Clay, especially when you start getting sectionalism, when you start getting the United States kind of pulled apart over the slavery issue, you're going to see Henry Clay over and over again bail the country out by cutting deals, making everybody happy. Henry Clay dies 10 years later, the Civil War. So keep in mind, right now, Henry Clay is nationalist, he's Warhawk, that's what I want you to know about him, but there's going to be a lot more about him as we move along. Along with Henry Clay, you have South Carolina's own John C. Calhoun. Calhoun comes from a plantation background, kind of like Jefferson and all that, except he comes from a South Carolina plantation. And we've talked about how South Carolina culture is different than culture everywhere else. We talked about that Caribbean-style slavery that comes in. John C. Calhoun is a brilliant man, handsome, completely icy demeanor. He's said to have only laughed twice in his life. Once was at Henry Clay. But nonetheless, a fervent nationalist, a man who at this stage in his career believes in just advocating for America's interest as a whole. He wants America to expand. He's somebody else we're going to be talking about over and over again. Just know John C. Calhoun, Warhawk, South Carolina politician. We're going to be seeing a lot more of him later on. Now, with the Indian provocations, with the impressment, with the Warhawks itching to invade Canada, Madison feels the pressure. He asks Congress for a declaration of war against Britain that keeps causing these problems. And on June 18th, 1812, the United States declares war on the British Empire, essentially. Now, the United States has a regular army, but it's tiny. Most of the regular army, the old Continental Army, has just been demobilized. What remained was reestablished as the United States Army. It's like I can't stress it up. It is small. It has not been tried in war. The generals who are still around are these old-timey Revolutionary War veterans. Most of them, past their prime. Henry Clay, the other Warhawks, they're very reliant, though. They're very hopeful about militia. They're thinking these guys on the frontier, they're tough. They're hardcore. They're riflemen, they're chewing tobacco and brawling and fighting. They'll be able to take on the British, and especially in Canada, because everybody knows Canadians just aren't tough. So they're really hoping that the militia is going to be able to help them out. The War of 1812 is the first war that the United States actually has a serious navy, as opposed to just a whole big flock of privateers. Under the Adams administration and the Jefferson administration, the United States builds 6 frigates. A frigate is a sort of the second biggest type of ship you have afloat. The frigates the United States build, though, are super frigates. These massive 44-gun ships. They're fast. They shoot a lot, a lot of metal flying at the enemy, and they are the top-of-the-line ships afloat. So War of 1812 is a major naval war as well. We're not going to talk too much about that, but the United States ships are engaged all over the world against British ships. So what happens? Well, a grand army composed of army regulars and a whole bunch of militia invade Canada, or at least they would have if the militia hadn't flatly refused to go into Canada, sat down and just gone home. The invasion of Canada's fiasco. To sum it up, basically, there's, as you can see from this map, there's all kinds of invasions. The United States will go in, attack a perfectly innocent town, burn it, harass the locals, get chased out, go back to America, invade, get chased out, invade, get chased out, over and over and over again, completely ineffectually and really embarrassingly. The one thing the Americans managed to accomplish in Canada is torching a town called York, which ends up, for really no reason, which we're going to see has implications later on. The British and their Indian allies, remember, and Tecumseh's out there, active and fighting on the frontier, they wreak havoc. Burning, looting, pillaging all along the frontier, which by now has extended essentially to Ohio, Indiana Territory, Kentucky. The frontier, remember, is steadily moving along. So the invasion of Canada is a complete fiasco, and not only has it gone bad, the British are actually moving from Canada, invading the United States. The British Army makes its way into the Michigan Territory. They attack Detroit, take it over. Fort Detroit at the time. They take it over, basically controlling Lake Erie, which gives them access to resupplying their troops, which means the British Army can now march through the Midwest all the way essentially into Pennsylvania if they so choose. This is bad. Now, it's not bad if you're the British or Tecumseh, things are looking up for you, but it's really bad for America. So, who saves the day? This guy, Oliver Hazard Perry, first of all. Oliver Hazard Perry goes to Lake Erie. He's a master commandant of the naval rank. He goes to Lake Erie. He manages to cobble together a flotilla of ships, get cannons on them, and goes out in the lake and fights a big battle against the Royal Navy ships on Lake Erie. Please understand, this is not like Lake Murray or some little lake. The Great Lakes are huge. They're basically inland seas. They have tides. So he fights this massive battle against the British on Lake Erie, and the end result of which is that he's successful. The British Navy is defeated in Lake Erie, which means the Americans control Lake Erie, which, if you look at the map here, you can see why that's important. Here's Lake Erie. So the British now, they march down from Canada or whatever. As long as they can control Lake Erie, they can resupply their men as they march along. But without Lake Erie, with the Americans controlling it, they can't. And now, of course, you have the other problem of Americans being able to transport people behind the British and cutting off a retreat. So the British Army, under a guy named Henry Proctor, they decide, well, we better retreat. So they start to march back to Canada, which essentially means abandoning their Indian allies. The reading I gave you guys, Tecumseh's speech to Proctor, is Tecumseh's response to that. Tecumseh is essentially being abandoned by Proctor. Proctor said, go to war. Tecumseh, we got your back, we got your back, we got your back. And when it no longer suits British interests, they just abandon Tecumseh. Because the Americans are coming to fight the Shawnee. And they're not coming to raid or burn, they're coming to destroy. So Tecumseh has no choice but to basically pack up his people and march off with the British. The Americans invade Canada again. They catch up with Proctor's army at a place called the Thames. And at the Battle of the Thames, there's a huge fight, and Tecumseh is killed in battle in 1813. The American men fall upon his body and mutilate him. They cut strips of his skin off to use as horse bridles and razor strops and stuff like that. The great biographer of Andrew Jackson, a guy named James Parton, who didn't like Indians at all, this is back in the 1850s, did not like Indians at all, said of Tecumseh that he was 1,000 times better than any of the men he fought. His adversary, William Henry Harrison, the guy who actually defeated him in battle, said, in another age, this guy would have founded an empire like Darius the Great in Persia, or or the Aztec Empire, the Inca. He was just that kind of guy, a man born to shake nations, who died bravely defending his people against what for him was a foreign hostile army. Nonetheless, now, 1813, Tecumseh is dead. However, the dream lives on. Remember, Tecumseh has been active all over the frontier, up and down the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. And he's gone south. And having gone south, he has spread his message among what are known as the 5 civilized tribes. These are the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Creek. Now, by 5 civilized tribes, that is what they called back then, historians kind of still use the term. Don't think, when people think Indian, they think Dances with Wolves, they think teepee and loincloth and all of that. By no means do these tribes in the South, to a limited degree, they practice that lifestyle still. But for the most part, these people have adopted European-style urban settlements. They live in towns. They mostly wear European-style clothes. There is a heavy, heavy European influence. Part of the reason for this is that the ruling classes, the elite people in these Indian tribes, are themselves, at this point, mostly European. Those fur traders, those traders, traders of other things, merchants who've come into these tribes from European companies, they marry chiefs' daughters. And then those children from there, because in most Indian tribes, descent is passed down through the female line, because of that, these people become elites, and then their kids marry elite people and so on like that. So you get this kind of caste system almost among these people. Some of these Indian tribal leaders become very wealthy. They own huge plantations, they own massive numbers of slaves, and many of them have lifestyles that are indistinguishable from their American or European neighbors. Now, one of these guys, make sure I'm on the right thing here. Now, one of these guys is a guy named Red Eagle. Red Eagle is a Creek war chief. He's a leader, a leader of warriors, essentially, a man who can, with charisma and his battlefield experience, attract a number of armed men to follow him. Red Eagle is good at everything an Indian warrior is supposed to be good at. He's a good fighter, he's a good hunter, he's good at games, he's good at speaking. He has all the talents an Indian leader should have. Interestingly though, Red Eagle has an entire other life as William Weatherford, wealthy planter. Red Eagle is only about 1/8 Indian. He owns a plantation in Alabama, a bunch of slaves, dresses like a European, by all appearances would have looked like a European, but nonetheless moves between these two worlds. Sometimes he's American, or of European descent, sometimes he's of Indian descent, goes back and forth between the two. Red Eagle, despite the fact that he's pretty much white, identifies far more strongly as an Indian. And when Tecumseh shows up, he's very receptive to Tecumseh's message. And William Weatherford / Red Eagle becomes the leader of a faction of the Creeks known as the Red Sticks. They painted their war clubs and tomahawks and stuff red. The Red Sticks are not the Creeks as a whole. They're one group of Creeks who are hardline, militant, who say, we need to take this opportunity to fight the United States. We will never have a better chance to do so. The British are here. The British are beating the Americans in Canada. They're beating them on the high seas. They're doing all this other stuff. We need to get behind what the British are doing. Now is our chance. Over and against this, there are the other Creeks who say, whatever the British are doing now, America is the future. The British are never going to be able to hold them back forever. We need to make accommodations with the Americans. Going to war with them is the worst thing we can do. Now, this doesn't solve itself, so what you end up with is a civil war, essentially, among the Creeks. Well, as part of the Civil War, a group of mixed-race Creeks gathered together in a place called Fort Mims. A merchant named Samuel Mims, a trader, essentially builds this little small fort. In this fort are Creeks, people who are mixed-race Creeks, American settlers who are getting away from all the general bloodshed on the frontier, and a small group of U.S. Army soldiers. Well, a group of Red Sticks find out about this. They go to the fort, they spend a few days casing it out, seeing what's happening. And then, August of 1813, They see the gates open. They've noticed that the gate's wide open. Now, it should be easy to shut, no problem, except they left it open for so long. Dirt from the rain has washed up underneath the gate, kind of making it stuck. When they see that, they know what to do. So, August of 1813, they charge in. The commander of the fort tries to shut the gate. It's blocked by the dirt. He gets tomahawked to death before he can do anything. There's a brief fight. The soldiers put up whatever kind of fight they can, but it is a total massacre. Something like 400 plus people are brutally slaughtered in this fort, men, women, children. They're scalped, they're mutilated. An army captain who came on the scene later on said what they did to the pregnant women does not bear description. For the Creeks, this kind of attack makes a lot of sense. This is the kind of thing they would do to a hostile tribe. We beat you and we humiliated you to the point where now you should be way too intimidated to fight us. We have shown you who's tough, back off. And of course, I shouldn't say this is entirely unprovoked. People on the frontier and the Red Sticks have been fighting at this point off and on a little bit already. The Fort Mims massacre, though, is just the absolute worst as far as violence has come so far. Now, as you can see from this American cartoon here, here's the Creeks, kind of, I guess what people in the eastern part of America thought Creeks looked like. Handing scalps over to a British soldier in exchange for money, and this basically idea is the British are behind all this. For the Indians, the Fort Mims massacre makes a lot of sense. For the Americans, though, this is exactly the kind of thing that's going to galvanize the anger, not only on the frontier, but among anybody who hears about this. This is the hated British giving money and support to the hated Indians who are murdering innocent men, women, and children in a peaceful fort. They gotta go. The anger of a nation is pointed at the Creeks, and all it needs is its instrument, and boy, does it find it. This guy, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, if you could sum up a man in one word, Alexander Hamilton, genius. Benjamin Franklin, genius. Most words are genius. But if you could sum up Andrew Jackson in one word, that word would be killer. Andrew Jackson is a hard, tough, violent, brutal man. From a young age. Andrew Jackson grew up in the place called the Waxhaws, which is, to this day, the absolute middle of nowhere, right on the very far west of South Carolina, around the South Carolina-North Carolina border. It's a really rough area. It's the kind of place where people like his parents, Scotch-Irish settlers, would go. Scotch-Irish are people who originally lived in Scotland. The British told them to leave Scotland and go to Ireland to suppress the Catholic population. The Scottish people who came there are Presbyterians. Then the British show up in Ireland and say, okay, all you guys got to join the Church of England now. So the Scottish Presbyterians, who now live in Ireland, Scots-Irish, they say nuts to that and they come to America. They don't settle along the eastern seaboard, they don't buy land. Instead, they go way off into the frontier, into the Appalachian Mountains. They fight with the Indians, they build their little farms wherever they feel like it, and are just generally a tough, hard, pioneering people. Jackson's father actually dies before he's born. The story is he tried to lift a tree that was too big to move and just died. His mother raises him and his three brothers. At the age of 13, his mother sends him off to fight the British in war. Andrew Jackson participates in these bloody battles we talked about with Cowpens and Camden and all that. He's present for that kind of fighting. Actually has a chance to kill Tarleton at one point. It's one of his great regrets in life that he wasn't able to kill Tarleton. Most of his regrets in later life were about people he should have killed but didn't. Gets captured by the British. The British officer tells Andrew Jackson to clean his boots. Jackson very famously refuses. The British officer slashes his face open with his sword to basically just wound him and make it to hurt him. Jackson is marched off into captivity with his surviving brother, and his mother goes to take care of him into jail with him. His mother and his brother both die of smallpox in jail. Jackson almost dies. And so at the age of 16, basically, he's a veteran child soldier who's now an orphan. He gets a small inheritance, ends up training with a lawyer, and from there moves west into what became Tennessee. In Tennessee, he sets up shop as a lawyer, which at the time basically meant arguing things in court, speculating in land, and getting into duels. Andrew Jackson was a combative man. I don't want to give you the impression that he was just always out there violent and killing people left and right without a reason. I mean, he was pretty violent, but he had a reason. People were always trying him. Everybody on the frontier tried everybody else. These were tough people. They're all jockeying for power, who's going to be in charge of what in this society that's being formed. Jackson, he shot people, he stabbed people, he caned people, he horsewhipped people. Even by frontier standards, he was pretty violent. He, at one point, got into a dispute with John Sevier, who was the governor, while Andrew Jackson was a state superior court judge, and they ended up getting into a almost kind of comical shootout in the woods. Jackson had a lot of problems because of his wife. His wife had actually been married to another man. She left him, divorced that guy, and married Jackson. And then there was some kind of legal dispute about whether she was actually fully divorced when she married Jackson. So people who didn't like Jackson would call her, a bigamist. She married 2 different men. She's a whore, all that stuff. At which point Jackson would just go for the guns. A guy named Charles Dickinson, and he got into it over a horse bet. Dickinson started mouthing off about Jackson's wife. Jackson called him out for a duel. Please understand, in a duel, you have 2 basic options. You're standing there pointing your pistol at the other guy, like this, or not pointing yet, waiting. And when the second says present, you raise your pistol. Now, you can either fire as fast as you can and try to kill the other guy before he kills you, or you can hold for a second, wait for him to fire, hope he misses, or at least doesn't kill you, and you got all the time you want to aim. Well, Jackson adopts that strategy. He knows Charles Dickinson is a great shot. He's going to try to shoot quick. So Jackson adopts plan B, hold off and wait. They go out for the duel. Andrew Jackson and Charles Dickinson look at each other. The second says, present. They both raise their pistols, and Dickinson, like he thought, fires. Boom! And hits Andrew Jackson square in the chest. Big puff of dust comes up. Jackson doesn't move. Dickinson, great God, have I missed? No, he didn't miss. And Jackson's a very skinny man. He had a lot of malaria and other problems. He's a very skinny man. He had this big loose coat on, and the bullet hit next to his heart, but not quite his heart. Big 50 caliber bullets. Barely missed his heart. Jackson, though, doesn't move or flinch or anything. He just takes very careful aim, fires at Charles Dickinson, fires through one side of his abdomen and out the other. Charles Dickinson dies in agony the next day, leaving behind a wife and a little baby. Does Andrew Jackson care? Not in the least. He goes home and nurses the 50 caliber bullet wound he has in his chest. That bullet will be bouncing against his heart basically for the rest of his life. By the time Jackson goes to the White House, he has 3 bullets in him. None from war. He was in a lot of wars, but managed to get out of war without getting shot. All 3 of those bullets were from private disputes. So that's just the kind of guy he is. So, Andrew Jackson, the war reaches Tennessee. Andrew Jackson is the Major General of the Tennessee Militia. That's actually why he got into it with John Sevier. John Sevier thought he should have that job. And so Jackson gets the word from the governor of Tennessee to march off and deal with these Red Sticks. So, with his arm in a sling from his latest shootout, Jackson rides off with the Tennessee militia and proceeds to fight the Red Sticks. Marching south, he fights a series of battles, Tallushatchee, Talladega, Tohopeka, until he gets to the famous Horseshoe Bend. Now, this Creek War that Jackson is fighting against the Red Sticks, this is very hard for him. Not only does he get malaria and diphtheria, all these other nasty things, he also has to deal with the fact that his men don't want to fight, his militia is not very disciplined. He gets a contingent of regular army soldiers. At one point he has to use the army against the militia. At one point he has to use the militia against the army. At one point they're all getting ready to march off, and Jackson mounts his horse and stands there in front of a cannon and says, if you guys march off, I'm going to blow all of us up. So the militia looks at Jackson, kind of weighs their options in terms of, is Jackson willing to blow himself up and the rest of us to keep us here? They decide yes, and they go back. So it's only by Jackson's iron will that he holds these guys together. So Jackson finally fights his way through the Red Sticks until he gets to a place called Horseshoe Bend, which is on a bend in the Tallapoosa River. If you look at Horseshoe Bend from above today, you can kind of see what it looks like. Now, the defensive capabilities of this are obvious. It's surrounded by water on all these different sides. There's this kind of narrow neck of land right here, so it's pretty easy to defend. And the Indians have built a really sophisticated wall there, actually. Jackson, though, has actually got together not only his army, but a whole bunch of other Indian allies. A bunch of Cherokee are there, a bunch of Creeks, and everybody else that weren't Red Sticks. Choctaws, Chickasaws, a lot of them. And so these guys converge from the outside. They canoe their way across the river, set up shop here, and then Jackson orders a frontal assault on the Creek position. His men attack, they storm the wall, they shoot through the holes in the wall as much as they can. There's hand-to-hand fighting, and then they finally break through. And when they break through, the fighting is as vicious as any Indian war has ever been. The great historian Marquis James said, "The Indian is like a piece of flint. He can't be bent, only broken." These men are raised from an early age to be warriors, to be tough, to ignore pain, to ignore hunger, to ignore fear. They gave no mercy, and they asked for none. Every Creek warrior at Horseshoe Bend fought to the death. They actually know how many I forget the number, it escapes me, but they actually know the exact number of Creeks they killed because Jackson's men cut off all their noses after the battle and piled them up so they could get a correct estimate. Almost every one dies who doesn't get away. William Weatherford, at this point, when basically the only people left in his Red Stick group are women and children in the woods starving, William Weatherford just basically goes to Jackson's camp. He walks right up, walks into Jackson's tent, and says, "Listen, if I was able to still fight you, I would fight you. If I had anybody left to take you on, I would. I would fight you to the last man, but my people are starving. I give up." Jackson at this point says, "Okay, fine," and he gives the Red Sticks a bunch of food. They've surrendered now. Jackson has beaten them. The significance of Horseshoe Bend, even though the number of people involved are relatively small, I mean, you're talking about a few thousand people all told, and that's not huge in terms of battles. Horseshoe Bend marks the end of serious Indian resistance to westward expansion. Andrew Jackson has essentially broken the back of that. The last chance the Indians had with Tecumseh and the Shawnee and his coalition in the north, with the Red Sticks in the south, with William Weatherford, all these other guys. This is the last chance the Indians have. They got a European ally, all the support to stop the Americans. It doesn't work. Never again will there be any kind of way to resist American westward expansion. That's not to say the Indians don't fight. They fight a lot. And there are certainly places where conceivably it might have stopped again. The Comanche, for example, after the Civil War. But there's really, in the end, it's all a foregone conclusion. No matter how long the Comanche would have held on, it still would have happened. This is the last chance the Indians have to stop the Americans, and it fails. From now on, America will expand steadily west, slowly but surely. They'll lose a few battles along the way. The Indians will fight as hard as they can fight along the way, but America is destined to move. Now, unfortunately for America, Napoleon, the British War with Napoleon ends in 1812 when Napoleon is defeated. And, well, now the British are able to send a great big army to America. And they send that army to America. They land at a place called Bladensburg in Maryland, where they chase off the local army, the local American army. And then the British proceed to march south into Washington, D.C., and torch it. Yes, the British basically just burned the capital. James Madison is forced to flee on horseback, riding as fast as he can. So, when your capital is being torched by the enemy, the war is not going well for you. So, clearly something needs to happen that's really going to turn things around. There's also the fact that the Federalists, who completely blame the Democratic Republicans for this war, have actually been meeting in Hartford, Connecticut, and talking about seceding from the United States. That's right, New England is talking about breaking away and forming its own separate country, allied with the British. So something needs to happen soon. Well, a couple things kind of happen. For one, Washington, D.C. at this point is not a big city. It's the capital, it's got symbolic importance, but it's basically a bunch of muddy roads and a few buildings that are, the capital and all that. A much bigger prize is Baltimore. The British really want to get up there in Chesapeake Bay to get to Baltimore. Unfortunately for the British, they have to get past Fort McHenry first. Fort McHenry, as you can see, is one of the big star-shaped forts that were common at the time. This eliminates dead zones and fields of fire. So the British sail up and proceed to bombard Fort McHenry. Now, while the British are doing this, one of their land raids or whatever, they captured this local doctor. And one of the doctor's friends rows out to this British ship to try to negotiate with the captain of the ship to get his friend out. Well, the captain says, all right, yeah, this guy's just a doctor, he can go. But then the battle starts, and he says, you guys got to hold off here for the night until the battle's over. So all night long, the doctor's friend, a lawyer named Francis Scott Key, watches the British bomb this fort. And as he's watching it, he's just so apprehensive, because if they take this fort, they're going to move along and take Baltimore. And the only thing he can see, because it's pitch black, the only thing he can see is when a bomb or a rocket goes off. The British have rockets. When a rocket goes off, you can still see the flag flying. As long as the flag's flying, the fort's still there, which means the Americans still have it. When the battle's over in the morning, he sees the flag is still there, and he writes a very famous poem called The Star-Spangled Banner. Later on, somebody sets it to the tune of an old drinking song called To Anacreon in Heaven, and you get the national anthem. So that comes out of it, and inspiring the defense of Fort McHenry. So the British aren't able to take Baltimore. They're not able to take any important cities of significant size. Meanwhile, all this is happening. Oh, that's what I was talking about in the Hartford Convention. The Federalists are all about, just, we're done with this war, it's stupid. Why did we get into this with the British in the first place? We could have been trading with them and making money. Now we're going broke. Our country's being invaded, our capital is being burned. It's all because of that crazy Jefferson and his fanatical love for the fanatical French Revolution. And this is bad. So who even cares about these people anymore? We need to just secede. Some called it treason. Now, while this is going on, negotiators are busy in the city of Ghent in Belgium, trying to end this, situation. Among the negotiators are John Quincy Adams, who we'll be talking about later on, and Henry Clay himself over there as a diplomat. Henry Clay, who likes to stay up all night drinking, gambling, and chasing the servant girls. Well, the British and the Americans come to a treaty called the Treaty of Ghent. The Treaty of Ghent basically ends the war on the principle of status quo ante bellum. Sorry, I forgot my Latin for a second, which is not like me. Status quo ante bellum, which is to say everything just goes back the way it was. You guys don't get any Canada, we don't get any America. Everything you have before the war is good. Everything we have before the war is ours, and that's it. The Indians get back all their land. It will be as if we never fought. Now, they signed that treaty, and that's great. They signed it on December 24th, Christmas Eve of 1814. Everybody's happy. Problem is, though, news travels slowly. You can actually have a letter on a ship, take it over, take it to the capital, let everybody know the war's over. Then they have to send letters out to everybody and tell them to stop fighting. So, if you're in New Orleans, for example, you don't know the war's over yet. And so when the British show up, under the command of Edward Pakenham, to try to take over the city of New Orleans, Andrew Jackson's there to meet him, and neither one knows that the war is over. Now, Pakenham shows up, and his commission is to capture the city of New Orleans, which is the most important point on the Mississippi River. It's the mouth of the Mississippi River, it's its port. If you control New Orleans, you control basically the rest of the Mississippi River. There's no point in shipping anything on it because it can't get out. So Pakenham's really eager to control New Orleans and get control of the Mississippi River. Because, remember, we talked about this last time, as far as the British are concerned, that sale that Napoleon had, Louisiana to America, was not really legitimate. And because Spain is Britain's ally in the war against France, Britain has every intention at this point of taking over New Orleans and perhaps the rest of Louisiana with it and giving it back to Spain. Or at the very least, holding on to New Orleans as a British possession right there at the mouth of the Mississippi after the war. Sure, they're supposed to give everything back after the war, but is it likely they will? Well, that's one of that what-if history type things. Nonetheless, Pakenham is perfectly prepared to seize New Orleans and take control of Louisiana and give it back to Spain. So, again, this battle is very important as well, because if Britain had managed to do this, and if they had managed to actually get an army into Louisiana territory and take over a bunch of stuff, conceivably America could have been stopped right there. Well, Andrew Jackson marches into New Orleans to end this problem. At this point, he's now a major general in the regular army. He's got regular army soldiers, he's got volunteer soldiers, he's got militia, he's got his Indian allies. In New Orleans, he gets the local Louisiana militia and militia of free blacks. So, at this point, Andrew Jackson has an extremely diverse army. Not only that, he makes deals with the local pirates and slave traders who inhabit Batavia Bay and move, go to Haiti and stuff to get slaves, which it's illegal to import slaves to America at this point. So, look at Andrew Jackson's army. He's got regulars, he's got volunteers, he's got militia, he's got pirates, he's got planters, he's got free blacks, he has Indians, he has this incredible just cross-section of America army over and against this much, much larger British force. Jackson's men are behind a dry canal and they set up a bunch of cotton bales and dirt to make this wall. Now, Pakenham's plan is clever, but it's complicated. Pakenham wants to send a group of his men across the river, Mississippi, to attack the cannons there, because as long as these cannons are here, they can fire at Pakenham's men as they march up. So he sends his men across the river. While they're doing that, his men are going to go forward. And his men are supposed to take out the cannons at the same time his guys get over here. Thus, problem solved, they don't have any fire on their flanks. Unfortunately, his men try to cross and they get swept way down the river, so they're not able to take over these cannons. So Pakenham sends his men forward. The cannons are blasting into them. And when his men get to the front, they realize that they weren't issued the special bundles of sticks they needed to fill in the trench to be able to get over it. They sent the wrong unit forward first. So Andrew Jackson's men just pour lead into these guys. Cannonballs are hitting them. Pakenham feeds more men into this. They get shot up. Andrew Jackson's men are picking off officers left and right. Gibbs goes forward. He gets shot off his horse and killed. Keane moves forward. He's shot in the groin, taken off the battlefield in agony, dies the next day. Generals are shot everywhere. There's no one left alive to lead these men. The men in the front are trying to push their way back. The men in the back are pushing their way forward. This confused mass of guys getting cannonballs and rifle bullets poured into them from two directions. Pakenham tries to save the day. He rides out, tries to rally his men. Has a horse shot out from under him. Gets on another horse. Gets shot in the leg. Falls off, gets back on a horse, at which point he's blown off his horse by grape shot. A bunch of little tiny balls fired out of a cannon. And the attack collapses into a fiasco. Andrew Jackson loses something like 333 guys out of 4,700, whereas the British take 2,500 casualties. It is the most lopsided victory in American history. Sure, it was fought after the war actually ended, but the consequences are still pretty important. Now, big winners here? Well, the Americans, obviously. They won. No more British helping the Indians. Jackson, he's a big winner. He's now become a national hero. Big losers, the British, not so much. I mean, they lost some men, but they didn't really lose any territory or anything that important. The Indians, however, they're probably the biggest losers in this. Jackson gets together, for example, the Creeks, both the Red Sticks and the Creeks who helped him, the Cherokees, Choctaws, everybody else, at a place called Fort Jackson, what's today Jackson, Mississippi. And he says, listen, some of you guys fought against me and I forgive you. Some of you guys helped me and I appreciate that, I really do. But here's the thing. You Creeks, you couldn't stop the Red Sticks, which means you either wanted to help them or you're incapable of stopping them, in which case, either way, it's useless to leave you in charge of so much territory. Therefore, you guys are now going to give us 2/3 of your land, which will now become property of the United States, as indemnifying us for all the havoc you caused during the war. By the way, if you don't, well, you don't want to know what's going to happen. The Creeks are the ones who helped Jackson, are naturally very angry about this, but nonetheless, they're pretty much forced to accede to this. Now, technically, the Treaty of Fort Jackson is not binding. Jackson didn't really have any authority as a general to deal with the Indians on that level, but he didn't really care. And technically, as per the Treaty of Ghent, they were supposed to give all this land back to the Indians. Jackson pretty much just ignored that. In fairness to Jackson, there wasn't really much he could have done anyway. As soon as the Creeks are off the land, settlers come pouring in. And there's no way Jackson could have moved these guys off. What's he going to do? Have the American army bayonet American citizens off the land on behalf of Indians? It wouldn't have happened. Of course, Jackson didn't want to do that in any case, but he couldn't have even if he had wanted to. Jackson, at this point, is kind of making his own foreign policy. He's the most successful general of all these guys, and so he just does what he wants. The Indians, everybody else, all the other Indians know it's pretty much a given now that they're going to be pushed out too, that this expansion west the United States is undergoing is a foregone conclusion, and that they're going to have to make some kind of deal with the Americans one way or another. And next time we're going to talk about the market revolution. We're going to talk about how the American economy and society grows and develops. So, I hope you enjoyed the War of 1812. Well, I mean, I guess you can't really enjoy a war. I hope you liked hearing about it anyway. Like I told you last time, I hope to get down as soon as possible. I love coming down there and seeing you guys. I took my wife actually to McClellanville the other day. She really loved it, thought it was a beautiful place. So thank you all. Thank you again, Ms. Hahn and Ms. McCall, for all the work you do. I will see you guys as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.